Congratulations, 30 years celebration of SubOptic. I clearly remember the SubOptic 1986 at Versailles, and I presented papers about the first optical fiber submarine cable, OS 280, developed by KDD, and it was a very cold season and sometimes snow. But the conference was very heated to discuss on the new technology and for the coming new eras.
In 86 or 85, I mean, a guy named Jean DeVos coined the word SubOptic, and he had a vision, I mean, to have that kind of meeting where people would meet, I mean, suppliers, operators, and he wanted people to share their experience.
The great thing about SubOptic is anybody can write a paper. It was for the industry to write about itself, to propose change.
I was very regretful in 1997, as I was building my first cable, Gemini, when Jean DeVos said, you should come to SubOptic. And I said, I'm sorry, I am just too busy, I cannot. By 2001, the next SubOptic was in Kyoto, and I went to Kyoto. And then subsequently went to Monaco in 2004, Baltimore in 2007, Yokohama in 2010, Paris in 2013, and now Dubai in 2016.
I joined KDD in 1964, and Trans-Pacific Cable, TPC-1, was laid. And I had enjoyed the sea travel on the cable ship long lines to lay TPC-2 cables. And it was really enjoy long sailing, and I never forget tasting free ice cream on the board. And that time we are still poor time in Japan.
As I was leaving digital transmission in 1976, I believe, my boss in those days, Eric Jacobs, to present the lecture on fiber optic transmission. And I listened to this and I walked out of that room shaking my head saying to myself, boy, am I glad to be leaving this organization. I'm going to be long retired before any of this makes any sense. I don't know anybody who was ever optimistic enough about how rapidly optical transmission technology is developing. Instead of me being long retired before that, find an application. 2 years later, I was back working on it. And by the time I retired, we were talking about 2 terabits on the version.
Mr. Frank Tuttle invited me to the cable ship long lines 1981. And he explained the AT&T board meeting we'll have on the cable ship. And 3 days later, I have saw the Japanese newspapers. AT&T formally decided to adopt optical fiber submarine cable system to the both Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. I think this was starting to change the world for the long-haul optical submarine cables.
A couple of people, in particular a guy named Frank Tuttle, great foresight, great vision, and decided the only way the Bell system was ever going to get another cable was to provide the FCC with competing technology. So he went to the FCC and proposed undersea cable using optics, and the FCC bought in, and Bell Laboratories in effect told him he was crazy. He didn't take no for an answer. He came to Bell Labs, in fact, with an open checkbook and said, make it happen, because this is the technology and it was the right thing to do. And the net result was a development program started in 1981, and in 1988 we were putting in cables across the Atlantic.
And we didn't know what to do with fiber optic cable, actually. I mean, the big thing was, in terms of capacity, faxes. We didn't care about capacity. Capacity would come later at the next SubOptic in 93, where, I mean, the internet was invented and catching up. Back then, it was just a new medium, and the customers, the operators, were I mean, looking at it and curious, but not daring to go for it. And that was the reason. I mean, SubOptic was organized. I mean, to try to familiarize operators with that new medium that could be useful one day, which was what happened, obviously.
Jack Cypress, AT&T Bell Labs, led us to develop new submarine cable systems. And our Japanese team did the best to the many problems for the TPC-3. Then I did report the details of the system to the Versailles SubOptic. Frankly speaking, I always felt worried about a little bit. Japan made difficult to develop the new submarine cables without actual experience for transoceanic system. I became very happy after my presentation in the Versailles SubOptic because I felt people accepted our Japanese optical fiber technologies. So thank you for the Mr. John Demos continuous effort for SubOptic. And Versailles was the first page of our Japanese submarine cables.
The cable has a unique zero-stress structure, a vault made of 2 layers of steel wires, a veritable safe protecting the optical core from any danger.
We became panic how to solve the surprising problem. Japanese newspaper said high technology network is a fragile system. And we went to the ocean near the Okinawa and fishing the shark. Then I decided to protect the cable using the steel sheet. 30 years ago, and Japanese Ministry of the Post and Telecommunications printed the postage stamp for the submarine cable always. And I visited MPT and asked the stamp for the TPC-3. MPT said, this is the last stamp for the submarine cable because of to start the deregulation. So now it's become a very valuable stamp.
And I was a junior engineer when I joined Sir Markham and SubOptic. So they left me with the most improbable paper then. I mean, it was just for junior, which was repeaterless systems. And it turns out that it's one of the greatest invention using fiber optic. And my conclusion was 2001, A Spacing Odyssey, and I was connecting the Eiffel Tower to the Statue of Liberty. I mean, having a transatlantic without repeaters, which might happen one day. I'm probably not. I mean, in terms of noise, well, you never know.
In my early years in the submarine cable industry, I worked on the supply side. Now, out of complete coincidence and surprise, I got a job with Cable and Wireless. So I moved from being a contractor at the bottom end of the value chain to being a purchaser at the top end of the value chain overnight. I remember going to SubOptic in 1997 in San Francisco when the boom was just about to start. And I'd been invited to go along with my main board director. And at the last moment, he had to drop out for a more important business reading. And I then was left with the wonderful keynote speech. Unfortunately, when it came to my turn to speak, and I wasn't particularly accustomed to public speaking, the slides all completely failed. And I remember standing there, and this keynote speech was at 12 o'clock, which was the big one just before lunch. And I stood with my legs shaking and my hand shaking as no slide came up on the screen. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a presentation without slides, but it's a very, very boring affair. And I could see, as I tried to stumble on with my speech without slides, the interest of the audience who had come to see this mind-breaking speech waning very rapidly. Watches were being looked at, and stomachs began to grumble because it was lunchtime as well. And from being a brand new Joe in this industry of buying systems, where I basically had the control of budgets, here was this bumbling idiot standing on a stage trying to get through a speech when everybody else just wanted to go to lunch. And that taught me one big lesson about SubOptic, that whatever you do, rehearse it, rehearse it, rehearse it, because if it goes wrong, it's painfully embarrassing.
I built my first submarine cable, the Gemini transatlantic cable, 20 years ago. I began, never having been involved in the submarine industry at all. But I had joined a company, MFS Communications, and suddenly I realized that we were going to run out of capacity transatlantic in 18 months. So I duly went to our chief executive. His reaction was, well, we better buy some more. My response was, no, I mean, the industry is going to run out of transatlantic capacity. I said, if you can't buy it, you build it. And he said, okay, well, we'd better build one. And I said, well, I've never done that before. He said, neither has anyone at MFS. All the better reason for you to do it. So that was my first submarine cable. And that's how I jumped with both feet, not knowing what I was doing, into this industry. I tried first to research who could build it for me. And ASN was the likely company. I got a name at ASN of one Jean DeVos, who was the executive VP of sales and marketing. I phoned him and he didn't return my phone calls. I phoned again and he didn't return my phone calls. So I scratched my head and I said, how can I get this man to return my phone calls? Because I'd left messages that I wanted to build a transatlantic submarine cable. I had an old friend at Cable and Wireless. So I went to Jonathan Solomon and I told him my dilemma. And he scratched his head and he said, sounds like a job for Tibbles. So he phoned John Tibbles and asked him to come around to his office. John Tibbles came, duly phoned Jean DeVos. Of course, Cable and Wireless was a very important customer of ASN. So immediately, Jean DeVos picked up the phone to John Tibbles. John said, I think you'd better return the phone call of this woman, Jane Stowell. And long and short of it is, in the course of 18 months, we built Gemini. It was ready for service in 18 months, and we created a lot of history. We ultimately ended up doing a joint venture a few months later with Cable and Wireless. So we created something faster than had ever been done, a new structure where it had never been done, and a complete new entrant designed largely to serve the nascent internet business. So it was a very exciting, very heady time. And I became addicted to the industry.
Gemini went into service in 1997 and was retired in 2004. And the reason for that was it was just uneconomical to maintain. And there was a brand new cable system, probably a third, if not of a quarter of its way through its life. So most of its components, designed for 25 years, were in brand spanking condition. And everybody, including the shareholders of Gemini, thought, this is like throwing away a new car. And I remember the first signs of, can't we reuse these cables that had become redundant at SubOptic? And I remember a talk going on and the audience piling out of the lecture theatre. And I could hear the comments, madness, don't be silly, you could never reuse a cable. And I used to stand there sucking my teeth thinking, perhaps it is a bit mad, perhaps we are pushing the envelope a bit far, because to pick a cable up from the seabed and reuse it is no mean task. Having been in the marine side of the industry, I knew that it was technically possible. And it actually happened. And bits of Gemini, the cable and the subsea plant has been reused again, and very successfully as well. For some unknown reason, I ended up becoming president of this august organization. So from the tatters of a pre-lunch speech to a few years later, there I was sitting guiding the executive committee on the way ahead with SubOptic. Unfortunately, what I hadn't worked out is I had chosen the moment, or I had been chosen for the moment, when the industry was about to go through its greatest decline in history. So I then found myself sitting with an executive committee trying to work out whether we even should do another SubOptic. And right up to the last moment, we were ready to pull the plug. But nevertheless, we all crossed our fingers. The story thereafter is one of the great stories that actually demonstrates the power of SubOptic. Because much against our forecasts, we got an attendance of well over 750. So with a bit of courage and a bit of trusting luck, SubOptic survived one of the leanest periods in the entire industry history. And what that taught us was that we were actually sitting in an enormous growth period. It's just we'd built too much too quickly. But you had to go through something like SubOptic to see that going on. It's only when you got the system owners, the system suppliers, the subcontractors all together that you realize that the future wasn't as grim as perhaps we thought it was going to be. And that's a very powerful message, if it ever happens again, that in times of economic decline, there's one thing you don't do, and that's run for the hills. Wherever we go in the world, the attendees will find the Irish bar, where after hours, the debates, the camaraderie continues well into the early hours of the morning. And I shall never forget one of the happiest, most amusing moments was in Baltimore, when finally the owner of the Irish bar said, okay, guys, we've had enough. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. We're going to shut up. No more drinks. So the assembled company, which was quite considerable, and probably 50, 60, 70 guys there and women. So we can't stop now. This is too good to be true. They went back to the conference where there was a huge sound system for the speeches. And they said, well, we better liven this up. And of course, they're all engineers. A lot of them are engineers. And suddenly, they had their iPlayers and all the rest, wired up to the entire conference speaker system. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, the Marriott in Baltimore was awoken to some Creedence Clearwater Survival or some Rolling Stones number, blasting out at God knows what decibels. And the next morning, we had to go around to the hotel managers and say, look, we're awfully sorry. And they said, no, actually, we've had a lot of complaints, but it's good to see a group of people having a great deal of fun. You guys must be in an industry that enjoys meeting each other. The submarine cable industry is here to stay forever. I mean, I can't see anything ever taking over as a different form of communication. In the old adage, if you give the customer the ability and the capacity, they will find ways to fill it. Nothing has been truer.